talking today about a really important issue, and that we're on Noongar country, the land of the Wadjuk people of the Noongar nation, and I'd like to pay my sincere and really deep thanks and acknowledgement of their leadership, their culture, their country that is theirs and always has been, and acknowledge their important role in our culture and society today, and the importance of their place in our mental health and wellbeing agenda. And particularly acknowledge the elders that we work with, Uncle Charlie and Auntie Helen Kicker, as being really important relationships for us. Sarah, did you have the PowerPoint? Would you like to introduce Seb as well?
Yes, I just wanted to say while Chelsea was speaking, I have pressed record. So if you stick around, that is your permission that you are happy to be recorded for this session. I will just go through a bit of housekeeping first. I'm sure that you've all been through this before in terms of being on a Zoom meeting. But as everybody knows, when you aren't speaking, please keep your mute on. Please mute yourself so that we can't hear your background noises. If you would like to speak, there are two ways you can do that. Kendall is also on the chat and she will be scooting around looking for people's hands up. Otherwise, there is the raise hand function and Kendall will monitor who is sorry, people are still coming in, who is coming up on the list to speak next. So we will get to you. We will have time. There will be time for questions at the end. So if you can hold your questions, unless you've got a really burning one at that very point, please let us know. Hope you're in a nice quiet space and you've got some really good internet connection. And how to mute and unmute. If you don't know how to do that, just talk in the chat and we can let you know. It's also sending a chat. Down in the bottom is the chat function. Looks like a little speech bubble so you can chat to everyone. And if you just want to leave, that's fine. Just leave the meeting. Just say goodbye everyone and we'll catch up with you later. Here's my number if you need to text me or send a chat. But yeah, if you've got any questions, I'm sure we're all experts in this now. So like we weren't 6 weeks ago, none of us could use this function and now we're all experts. So what I'll do now is I have also got the PowerPoint that I'm going to control from here. Chelsea, just tell me when you want to go to the next slide. How do I make that a slideshow down here?
That looks good, Sarah, you got it?
Yep. Oh, hold on. Yeah, here we go. You ready, Chels?
Yep, okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if I should just dive straight in. So I'm sure some of you will have heard about the campaign before, but we are organising a group of people, a community of people who really care about mental health and care about what kinds of options and supports are available to everybody in our community. As part of the campaign, we're building people power, grassroots power. So we're calling on people with a lived experience of mental health challenges, families, friends, the organisations that provide them with supports, and anybody who cares about prevention and community support and mental wellbeing. And we're asking you to join us and we can all band together this year to make this campaign really strong and incredible, because it's through a collection of all of us together that we can build power and influence change. Sarah? Yeah, so we're going to dive in. This session is really to provide quite a lot of policy nerd detail. I'm a bit of a policy nerd, so that we can provide you with a lot of detail about why we're doing this campaign, why it matters from a facts and figures and policy point of view. I'm sure that you're all really connected to why it matters from a lived experience and personal point of view, but there is also a lot of funding and policy information that lines up with those lived experiences that help to show the story about why this is really important. So the main piece of policy that is really fundamental to mental health in Western Australia is the 10-year Mental Health, Alcohol and Other Drug Services Plan called Better Choices, Better Lives. When we talk about it, we mainly just say the plan because it is the most important document in WA in terms of mental health and what we need to change. Now, the state's plan says that funding for prevention and community support needs to change, that we need to turn the system around and reorient away from crisis and to preventing mental health challenges before they start and preventing them from worsening by providing people with good quality supports and choices around the supports that they want so that people can live good lives in the community. And this campaign is to call on the government to finally match that hope and that intent by putting the dollars behind the policy and implementing the plan. So why is this plan really important? The plan is really long, and so we certainly don't expect everybody to actually read the full 250 pages or whatever it is, but it's really important foundational document. It was based on very extensive statewide consultation, and it has been widely endorsed by consumers, carers, family members, NGOs, clinicians, government agencies, and the whole mental health sector. It has a lot of support, and that is really important. It helps us a lot in the campaign. It also really is important because, Sarah, I'm just trying to see if I can, sorry everybody, if I can hide the, there we go, thank you. I couldn't see all of my slides, sorry about that. All of the political parties agreed to the plan, and that's also really helpful to us because it lives beyond whichever government's in power. In fact, this plan was developed by the Liberal government and it has been endorsed by the current Labor government. Importantly, it's based on some really important principles around recovery, around having a meaningful life, you know, prioritising the voices of consumers, carers and family members, people having choice, people being able to self-direct their lives and say what's important to them, and at the base of all of that, human rights. This plan is also, the other thing that's different about this plan that's a little bit different to what is in place in most other states and territories is that it focuses on the whole system and it sets out exactly what we need to do to make the mental health system work better for people. Sarah? Okay, the plan said that we needed some pretty significant reform and that we needed to essentially have a mental health system that had different organising principles. At the moment, I'm sure many of you are aware that our mental health system is really oriented around acute, hospital-based, clinical-based and emergency services. The plan said we need to turn that around and that we need to start with prevention and that we also need to provide people with good supports in the community so that people can live a good life and hopefully, well, and then ultimately reduce their need for those crisis and acute services. We have too many people spending too much time in hospital and presenting to emergency departments on a repeated basis, and they are clear signs that what we are doing isn't working very well for people. Now, this slide, I know it's quite wordy, but there's some jargon in this slide that I really want to explain because it's quite important for how policy works in WA. The plan uses this language called optimal service mix, which basically means that we need lots of different kinds of services from prevention, community support, clinical treatment, supported accommodation, as well as hospital-based services and forensic services and specialist services for people with particular diagnoses or different cultural needs. So we need a full range of services because that means that we can meet people's needs where they are at the right time. The plan also uses the language of what's called the optimal level or the optimal service mix. And that basically means that if we have the right amount of each kind of service, then we'll be able to meet people's needs and have better outcomes for people. These services need to be in the right place. So for example, they need to be community-based, they need to be available in the regions, and they need to be available at the right time. It's no sense accessing an early intervention service when you've been very unwell for many years and now need an emergency department service. When we get this optimal mix right, we'll have what's called a balanced system, which will mean that we've got the right kinds of services and the right mix of services and the right amount of services so that we can meet people's needs. At the moment, we have the wrong balance and what's called in government jargon term an inefficient mix, which basically means we have too many, we have not enough of the early era intervention, prevention and cheaper services. So as a result, more and more people are driven to crisis point and end up needing to use more expensive and more intensive hospital-based services. So here's some, this is really strange. I can't get any feedback because I've got the screen show and I can't see anyone's faces. So I'm just hoping that everyone's going okay. If I need to slow down or provide any more detail, can maybe people send a message through the chat so that I can monitor that? I'm seeing some thumbs up, so that's awesome. And I'm just going to keep going and hoping that I'm providing you with a level of detail that's not too much but is interesting enough for you to engage with.
I also should say, Chelsea gave me a very clear direction to introduce Dr. Sebastian Rosenberg, and I promptly forgot to do that. So I might take this opportunity now just to do that. Dr. Rosenberg has joined us from, where are you now, Seb? Are you still in Sydney?
No, I'm temporarily on the south coast of New South Wales, and there's worse places to be.
Yes. And will you be able to provide us with your titles?
What do you mean, apart from sort of overlord?
Yes.
So I head the mental health policy unit at the Centre for Mental Health Research at the Australian National University, and I also am senior lecturer in the Brain and Mind Centre at the University of Sydney.
Great. So gather your questions during the PowerPoint if you can, everyone, and we'll catch up when I stop sharing the screen, and you can ask questions of both Chelsea and Seb afterwards. Everyone okay? Keep going.
Thanks for that, everyone. It's really tricky doing this by Zoom without having the feedback. I just want to pick up on Tara's comment, which I think is actually really important to discuss right now. And I've realised I actually intended to do that at the earlier on in the presentation. So thank you, Tara. Tara says, I really need a broader definition of community supports. So community supports in the language of the plan are different from community treatment. So first I'm going to talk about community treatment, which is essentially the community teams, the acute treatment teams, those services that people can access through the government delivered public community health services. I'm going to guess that most people will have some knowledge or experience of those, either personally or professionally, or some understanding of what they do. They're primarily focused on people who are in the plan language, and I'm going to put a note here to stigma, but this language is used in the plan to people with what's called severe and persistent mental illness. So the state government focuses its responsibility on people who are doing it the most tough and having the hardest time and experiencing, I guess, the most acute distress. So most of our resources are focused around that, and because we don't have enough resources, it means that more often than not, people need to be having a seriously hard time in order to get a service. Community support services, when we talk about community supports in the context of the campaign, we're lining up that definition exactly in line with that in the 10-year plan. So a community support is normally described as a non-clinical service that walks alongside people to support them to understand their needs and experiences and make sense of them, develop some goals or wishes, and support them on a personal recovery journey. So the kinds of things that are currently funded in Western Australia to offer those supports include things like employment services, carer support and information services, supported accommodation services. What else have we got? Group support, peer support, individual kind of one-on-one supports. So we're really in this context talking about non-clinical services that help people with the context of their lives. So for example, it might be, instead of going, well, how do I manage this challenging symptom I'm having, a lot of people will instead say to us, well, it's not really the symptom management that most bothers me, it's the fact that I don't have a secure and stable home to live in, I don't have a job, and I'm finding it difficult to connect with people. So the non-clinical community recovery supports walk alongside people and help them with where they're at and what's important to them. And that's a really important difference. We'll often hear the politicians and media talking about community-based services, and community-based services can usually include both those recovery supports, but also the clinical treatment services. I'm hoping that's enough. Tara or others, if I'm being confusing, because I do tend to waffle on, please send a message through the chat and we can pick it up at the end. Okay, Sarah, would you just go back? So the donut, we call these donut graphs, these little round graphs, and basically the graph on the left shows what we've got now, and the graph on the right shows us what we should have in terms of a balance of services. So on the left, it shows us that out of all of the money that we spend on prevention, out of all the money that we spend on mental health, we don't spend very much on prevention, and we need to spend more. The community support is shown in the teal or the green little component of the graph, and on the left you can see that that's just 8%, and if we had the best mix of services that would support the best outcomes, you can see that that needs to grow a lot, from 8% of all the services to 19 or almost 20%. The graph on the left, the yellow or light orange band, shows you that we rely too much on hospital-based services, and that in an ideal system, we could shrink the amount that we rely on hospital services, because we would be supporting people to be well and satisfied and living a good contributing life in the community.
Chelsea, can I say something to Sebastian?
Yeah, go for it.
Look, I can't help it. I couldn't spite in my tongue. But look, I just wanted to say that if you can see quite clearly on the left-hand side, it says current inefficient mix of services 2012, 2013. So Chelsea actually said this is what it looks like now. But in fact, this was, well, crikey, where are we now? About 8 years ago, 6, 7 years ago. And just to say that the evidence that Caroline Spencer, the Auditor General, produced at the end of last year actually suggests that this level of inefficiency has in fact gotten worse in the 7 years since this donut on the left emerged. So in fact, we're less balanced, we're further away. And to me, I think that's not only interesting and horrifying, but of course the other thing is that we're actually closer to the end than the start. You know, it's not actually that far until 2025, and we're closer to that than we are to the donut on the left-hand side, and yet further away from the goal. And I just thought it was worth clarifying that.
Thank you, Seb. You are, of course, completely right, and we are going backwards. We're investing less. We spend about 2/3 as much on prevention now as we did in that graph on the left. And we've also had a slight drop in community support spending, and we've had a huge increase in spending on hospital beds and on community treatment. So Seb is right, we're going backwards and we're further away from the ideal system than we were before, in the time frame of the plan, which was designed to turn that around. So that's why this campaign is so important. Next one, Sarah. Okay, this is another representation of the same issue, really. On the left, it's a a little bit blurry, I think. It might be a little bit tricky to read, but the columns on the left of the right, left is for mental health and right is for alcohol and other drug problems. And the columns show you what proportion of people in our community experience those issues, or the numbers, the estimated numbers of people that experience those issues, and how many people are in each category, I guess, for want of a better word, of people who are well, people who have mild issues, moderate issues, and severe and ongoing issues. I wanted to show you this graph because it's quite important for you to see that because this is a state election campaign, we're focused primarily on the responsibility of the state government. And in this triangle or the pyramid that you see on the page, those blue bands, prevention, self-care, specialised community services and hospital services, they are the areas where the state government, specifically the Mental Health Commission and the Department of Health, have responsibility. In the middle, you'll see primary care and enhanced primary care. And many of you might have heard of the WA Primary Health Network, and we see, and GPs and those kinds of things. That grey section in the middle of the pyramid is where those services sit. Now, prevention's right down the bottom, and it's saying we should have lots and lots of prevention, which is kind of ironic because we're shrinking the spend on prevention instead of growing it. And it's also saying right up the top, the second from the top, that we need quite a lot of specialist community services as compared to how many hospital services that we need. So that's just an important framework for saying that there's quite a lot of areas of mental health service delivery where the state government sees itself as not really having a role. It's also really important to point out that the majority of people that need a support somewhere between enhanced primary care and specialised community support actually can't get one. And nationally, that group is sometimes described as the missing middle, which, Seb, am I right? I never can have the numbers for this in my mind, but is it about 700,000 people estimated, maybe Australia-wide, that actually need a support and can't get one? Is everybody still there?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. All right, I think we might move on. In terms of the current donut graphs and things that are coming up on the chat line, there is something more current from the Auditor's General report, which I actually took out of the presentation late this afternoon. So clearly that was an error of judgment. What we will do is we'll make sure before we distribute the slides, we'll chuck it back in so that you can see the change. Okay, next slide. People, thank you. Right. Okay. So, sorry, excuse me, Joanna, I'm sorry, I'm on a webinar. Sorry, everybody. On the right-hand side, this was when the plan, this is an image directly from the plan. This column on the very left in the graph on the right-hand side talks about mental health community support. The teal or green colour shows you what we had in 2012, 2013, when the plan modelling was done, that we had about 19% of what is needed. So that lighter greeny brown colour shows you that the gap in what is missing is vastly bigger than what we're actually providing to support people. So we can only provide enough support at the moment for 1 in 5 of the people that need community support, and we need 5 times as much community support as we have now. When good community supports are available, and we're seeing increasing evidence from this actually during the coronavirus situation, is that when community supports work well and when they're linked with and connected with the clinical services and other types of services that people might need, like housing services or family supports and other informal supports that people use, when all of that works well and is connected, people can actually do really well in the community. The problem is that things aren't connected, they're completely separate and fragmented, and we just don't have enough of those good quality supports to support people. So we need 5 times as much, and that's what we're asking through the campaign. Thanks, Sarah. This graph shows another way of, is another image setting out how the change needs to occur. So it said that in 2013, we had 842,000 hours of community support, and that we needed to increase that by 5 times within the 10-year period of the plan. Now, when last year they put out a plan update, so they looked at the modelling and they looked at what services we provide, and they said, okay, we've gone from 842,000 hours to 910,000 hours for the whole state. So in the first few years of the plan, they achieved a slight change. Now I can tell you now that spending's actually going down, not up, and we are nowhere near the almost 3 million hours that we were supposed to have in 2020. We're nowhere near that now. We're still right back down around this 910. So to get from 910 to almost 5 million in 5 years is a pretty big ask, but it's an important ask, and we're going to ask for it. Down the bottom, you can see that investment in community support services is actually going down. So we've had a 7% or a 3 million drop in a 5-year period that tracked the first part of the plan and the current government, the current state government. Sarah, thank you. All right, moving away from community support now to talk about prevention. Now, prevention gets even less attention than community support in Western Australia in particular, and it's a real problem. When we talk to community members and family members, no one can understand why you wouldn't talk about stopping this stuff before it starts. It doesn't make sense to anybody. The plan said that prevention needed to grow from 1% of the total mental health bucket of spending. So if we have, for example, $800 million of spending in mental health, then we need to spend 1% of that on prevention. The plan said we need to grow that to 5% of the total budget. So if the budget grows bigger, then we need to spend more and more on prevention in order to meet the need. The graph on the right will show you that between 2014 and 2017, there was a little bit of a drop in prevention spending, but it was roughly the same. It sat up around the $21 million mark. However, since 2017, 2018, we've actually had a huge cut. So we're right down now to $13 million. We spend only 2/3 of what we spent at the start of the plan compared to what we spend now. So the campaign asks, we want to grow from the 1% right up to 5%. And again, the Auditor General's report showed that prevention spending had gone down. One of the important things to know about the plan is that it's mental health and alcohol and other drugs. It's a plan for both. The balance is different in the AOD, or alcohol and other drugs sector. So in AOD, we have actually quite a significant difference in spending on prevention. I think it's around 5 or 7%. And that part of the prevention spending hasn't actually dropped. The prevention cuts have been to the mental health part of the budget. Okay. This gives you the total, oh gosh, I've just realised it's already 5 o'clock. This gives you the total spending. So this is a current donut, not a donut graph, but a pie graph showing you the spending from a few years ago. So it showed that we spent nearly 6% on community support. Now in 2017 and 18, we spent just $15 million on prevention, but we spent a whopping $784 million on clinical services. That's community treatment and hospital beds combined. And if you add up prevention and community support together, we spend only 7% of our total mental health budget on those earlier intervention, community support, community-based services. Okay, does anybody think that this problem is not a problem? It doesn't seem to be the case. So Sebastian can maybe talk a little bit about what he's done nationally. It shows that the problem is the same across the country. The Auditor General's report that is mentioned earlier showed that 10% of mental health consumers in Western Australia needed to use 90% of the hospital care services, almost half of the mental health emergency department services, and almost half of community treatment. Now, to me, that means that we are not meeting those people's needs and that there needs to be some alternative options developed. The Auditor General's solution, they said, fix the service mix, implement the plan, fund the plan, and increase community-based services. Another report, just from last year as well, found that 27% of the people who were in a mental health inpatient unit could be discharged that very day if they had a supported accommodation or a community support service. So they weren't in hospital anymore because they needed a clinical service. Their clinical needs had been met. What they needed was something different that supported them to transition to and live well in the community. The solution for that, we need to invest in supported accommodation services. And that is part of that $250 million campaign ask for an increase in community support. Supported accommodation services is a really important part of that increase in services needed. Okay, this is one of Seb's slides from his wonderful conference presentation last year. It basically shows a jurisdictional comparison. WA is in the middle, and the dark blue is grants to non-government organisations. Seb, I wondered if you wanted to just have a little bit of a chat about how WA compares to the national picture.
So look, there are just, a couple of quick things that I wanted to mention, I guess, based on not even so much on this slide, but on some other things that I've looked at. There's no doubt that so overall it's important to understand that we've been going since 1992-93 with mental health strategies, and as I mentioned late last year when I was in Perth, total spending on mental health hasn't really changed as a proportion of the overall health budget. So the overall context is minimal. It was 7.2% of the health budget in 1992, and it's 7.6% in 2017-18. And mental health spending nationally has been declining since 2013-14, about 0.5% a year. So basically, if you think things are tough and getting tougher, then the feeling you've got is probably justified. Western Australia spends the most per capita on mental health of all jurisdictions. In 2017-18, Western Australia spent $314 per person on mental health services. And to give you an indication, Victoria spent $227. So Western Australia was sort of almost 40% more. Again, just looking at NGO services, I don't think much has changed really. In 1992-93, NGOs got 3% of the West Australian mental health budget. In 2017-18, it was 5.8%. And grants to NGOs in Western Australia have been declining by just under 1% per year since 2013-14. So again, you think things are tough, you feel that they are, then they actually are. There is also good evidence to show, as Chelsea said, that the amount of money that's going to psych wards in general public hospitals has gone up. It was 22% of total spending in 1992-93. In 2017-18, it was 35%. So I'm getting this information from, which is publicly available, from the AIHW, Institute of Health and Welfare Mental Health Services in Australia website, or the mental health chapters of the report on government services by the Productivity Commission. And the length of stay is also the highest in Western Australia too, and the cost per inpatient day is the second highest behind the Northern Territory. So there are some structural things which are in WA which are unique and which embed inequity and drive us further from the goals enunciated in the plan. And that's a really important point. And I also just want to mention one other thing which struck me. About 10 years ago, 9 years ago, paid consumer workers in the sector were 3.6 FTE. And a lot of people say, oh, well, this has been a significant change of getting paid consumer workers into the sector and so on. But according to the report on government services, Western Australia reported that number had gone all the way to 3.8, an extra 0.2 of an FTE of a consumer worker. And just by way of contrast, and I'm not even holding this out as being particularly excellent, Queensland reported 70. So I think we see some differences in WA structure, as I say, which embed perverse incentives that are leading us away from the destination articulated in the plan. And again, you know, if it was just a bunch of rabble-rousers like you guys or WAAMH that were trying to demonstrate this inequity, then that's one thing, and you might call that advocacy. But the really delicious thing was to see Carolyn Spencer from the Auditor General discharging her legislated obligations to provide a report on progress to back this up and to demonstrate that we are getting further away. So it was put on the chat that, you know, why is this? How can this possibly be? And I think that bears further discussion. I won't take up time now, but discussing why that is the situation and how decision makers are permitted to get away with that at a time when the policy says the reverse might be a useful thing to do in thinking about tactics for this campaign going forward. Thanks, Chelsea.
Chelsea, are you there?
You're on mute, Chelsea. You're on mute, Chelsea.
I've been doing this for 2 months and I still forget that sometimes. I didn't want everyone to hear my typing in the background. I'm just wondering, Sarah, about how we're going to pick up those, like that political commentary around how we get past the resistance. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later in this session when you talk about the campaign, because it really is the campaign. It's the people power, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yes, we'll talk about that at the end.
Yeah, I think we're done on the stats slides, guys. So if you're feeling like graph overload and numbers overload, it's okay. We're nearly there. We just wanted to outline to you what the plan said we would achieve if we actually implemented the plan. And
sorry, just one more thing. I beg your pardon. I'm sorry. I keep butting in. I beg your pardon. I just want to mention I haven't quite had a chance to do a quick thing, but I just wanted to and I can provide this afterwards, but I also was just having a quick look at the Medicare group reports, which show what the spending was for Medicare, because a lot of what we've been concentrating on has been state government spending, and I think it's really important to bring it also to the picture about what the federal government is spending. And I just wanted to let you know that in March 2020, which would be a low month, particularly with COVID and so on, Western Australia still spent or was responsible for $5 million worth of spending on psychology services. So I just wanted to let you know, when you start to talk about how much things cost, it's worth putting that into perspective, that it's in a low COVID-affected month, you're talking about $1.25 million a week on psychology services under Medicare in Western Australia alone. So that would be, well, on average, it'd be at least $60 million a year. It'd probably be more than that.
Thanks, Seb, and that is really important, because one of the things that people talk about is whether or not services are connected as well. And one of the things that we hear a lot about those psychology services is that very often they're not. They're designed to support people around how you think about the problems that you're experiencing and how you respond to them, not necessarily to resolve the housing issue that you might have or help you get a job. And $60 million a year-ish on psychology services is a hell of a lot more than 13 million on prevention, right? So maybe we can bring, if people are interested, maybe we can bring some more of those federal funding stats to people. The other thing that we haven't mentioned, because it's a little bit of a thorny one, is the NDIS. And when we're talking about the community support needs that we have in Western Australia, and that the amount of services and supports that the plan says we need, the NDIS will provide some of those support services for some people. Many of you will be aware that it's pretty hard to get an NDIS plan for psychosocial disability associated with mental health challenges, and that only a very small proportion of people with mental health issues will get an NDIS plan. So if someone suggests that we can rely on the NDIS to provide all of the community supports that we need in WA, they're dead wrong. We can only assume that they will provide the support to a small proportion of people that need them. Okay, so in terms of what the plan will achieve, I think you've probably had that slide up for long enough, but we'll reduce suicides, we'll reduce demand for acute services. People will have better lives if they're getting the supports that they need. People will have access to services, rights, dignity, looking at people's holistic needs instead of focusing on what's going wrong in their brain, what's going on in the context of their lives. Hoping that people can get support near where they live. Hoping that people can have supports that are designed by people who have experienced similar challenges to them and know what they might want and need, so that we've got the involvement and co-design from families, friends, carers and consumers. That people have choice, that they get to choose what they participate in, and that they can find things that are helpful for people. And that will result in better lives for people, more social participation, more productivity, more economic participation, a good life for people, because then that's what we all want for all of us in our community. Okay, Sarah, I think it's you now in terms of the campaign.
Great. Thanks, Chels, and thanks, Seb. That was all really, really extraordinary. I'm just going to check in with everyone. Everyone's still here, going okay. I'm seeing some thumbs up. That's great. So there are some familiar faces I have seen here, and welcome back. And thank you all so much for coming back and involved in this session. I haven't been reading your chat, but I hope Kendall and Chelsea and Seb have been writing furiously down some answers. So what I'm quickly going to do now is talk about the campaign. I'll go back to the PowerPoint now so that we can just go through some of the really important points. And as Chelsea, just that last slide, I just wanted to make the point that although we're talking about numbers and figures and statistics, this campaign is about people, and it's about putting people first and at the centre of everything that we want to achieve. And so we have designed a campaign that is person-centred and driven by people as a community organising model, with the intent of making sure that there is the effective and prevention community mental health services for every person in WA, not just someone who needs hospital care, and that prevention and community health services rely heavily on that funding and government support. So we need to make sure that they're invested in properly, and that the government considers the community sentiment in deciding this. So we need to tell the government what is happening, and the way that we do that is through your stories, through telling your stories. So we have the website. Many of you have probably already been onto the website. So here is the campaign website here. Jump on, and when you jump on, join the campaign. What that will do, it will mean that I can send you emails about any actions that we're doing, keep you up to date with any of the exciting things that have happened. I'm just about to draft an email to go out about the media that we had on today. So please make sure you join up to this. And there's also up here is the resource kit. So that's where all of the posters, this PowerPoint will come up, the recordings, and everything that you need in order to go out to your community to tell your story through this campaign. So Chelsea's already talked about the asks. When you're going out to your community, we need an increase of prevention spend from 1 to 5%. and we need a 5-fold increase in investment in community support services. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk to people in how that they have used those services and they have recovered, and we're going to talk to those services about the work that they do. So sharing and telling your stories, we've already started a process with some peer support workers for people to tell their stories in a safe way with informed consent, so that when their story does go up on the website, or if they do speak to a politician, they're cared for before and after in an informed consent way. So all of those will be loaded up on the website. This is me. This is, if you need to get in touch with me, my email address is the prevent support heal at waam.org.au. So if you've got any ideas, you can always send me a message. But I think most of you have my email address now anyway. So this is a state election campaign. That means that we're going to be running this in the context of a state election and convincing every single candidate in every single electorate that mental health is the #1 issue. And to do that, we need people power. We need to make sure that there are people with us on this campaign. So every single person you know, speak to them about this. Talk to them. If you're passionate about this, get them to sign up to the campaign. Get them to write a letter. Get them to come to a rally. Get them to do some leafleting. When we're allowed out of this COVID environment, get them to come to some events that we're going to be running. Make sure that there are people with you. And all you have to do is bring 5 friends. Everything that we do, every email that we send, every action that we do, just ask 5 friends to do that. Because the more people that we have supporting this campaign, the greater the impact. And if this is an election issue for the government, then we will get the asks that we need. And that is the power of community organising. So the actions I said before, hang on, what did I miss on that one there? Yes, all of the things. Sign up for the emails. Now the petition is a paper petition, because here in Western Australia we live in the dark ages and they don't accept online petitions yet. So there is a petition on the website that you can print off, get everyone to fill in, and you'll need to post it back to us. Head over to the Facebook and Instagram, give us a like and share all the things. We are going to do some training, so we'll let you know about that. Actually, very exciting. We have just locked in former Green Senator Scott Ludlam to do a How to Meet with Your MP session on the 27th of May. So if you want to jump into that, just go to the events page on the website. So the telling your story process, there's also the process that on the website as well. Jump onto the Facebook and website, I'll show you that in a sec, and that is where we're at. So let me just jump, I just want to jump onto the website now and just show you what I've been talking about. So here we are. I stopped sharing. That's not helpful. Here's the resource kit. So here's the presentation that you can have. Here are some infographics you can print off. Here are some things you can share on your Facebook page. Here's a newsletter you can put in your organisation's next newsletter. Here's the petition that you can print off and send back to us. When you join us, you can tell us the things that you would like to do for the campaign. And here, most importantly, are the list of events. So everything is online at the moment. So telling your story for impact is the next one, and that's where you, with the person with lived experience, can come and talk about how you want to tell your story. You can do that through here on the website. I see Carly has joined us on the chat. So Carly's told her story and we've uploaded that to the website there. So that's pretty great. I will also just jump on and show you the Facebook page. So today we had a pretty extraordinary event where we had our first story in the West, which is extremely exciting because now we're officially public. So if you can jump onto the Prevent Support Heal Facebook page and have a look and have a read at Kerry's story. It's just loading. Here we are. So please share that. It's a pretty amazing story. And also, Kerry was on 6PR this morning. So there's a really lovely interview with Gareth Parker. To have a listen, it is worth the 10 minutes of your life to sit and listen to that. And please share away and have everyone listen to that as well. So I think I'm going to come back to life now and open it up to some questions. Oh, look how dark I am. I'm going to turn my light on. Kendall, how are you? Kendall, Kendall, have you been keeping track of some burning questions for Seb and Chelsea?
A lot of the questions have been captured in the chat and some have actually already been responded to. I may just go back and bring up some key points. Oh, we've actually got one brand new one right now.
Actually, just before you do that, I might just bring in Kerry, who I can see also sitting in the dark. It's funny, this thing, when the sun's just setting here, Seb, so we're all sitting in the dark now because we've been sitting. So Kerry, everyone's saying well done to you for your story. And I just, again, want to give a heartfelt thanks to the wonderful interview you did with Gareth today. Do you want to speak to it a bit about the campaign and your story and anything like that?
Yeah, I think, so Gareth, the radio interviewer Gareth was wonderful. And he asked some really extraordinarily perceptive questions and pursued the human angle. And I think it's so important that we understand that behind all of these statistics and all of these numbers, there are so many families that are impacted and in pain, and that's not okay. And I felt extraordinarily well held by Gareth. I thought he did a fantastic job. The challenge I had, of course, was we have our story, and of course people are interested in unpacking these stories that because of stigma we don't often get heard. And I found it challenging to continually kind of bring it back to, well, that's actually our story, but this is what it means, and this is why the system is so broken, and this is what we need to do to fix it. And so continually kind of trying to weave that narrative between this is real life, and these are the reasons that real life is not represented in the services that we're receiving at the moment, is a challenge that I think the more stories we hear, the more people can start to join the dots and go, okay, so that's why. And the other part that I thought was really useful for him was to hear from us that this is not a story of a broken brain, this is a story of a broken society and people responding to it, and that our services are modelled around broken brains, and that's why they're not working. And so the more we can kind of continue to make that connection for policymakers and for system designers, the more powerful I think our voice is, because we're all saying the same thing. And we have so much resistance to people hearing that, because our current services planning frameworks and our current policies are still driven by clinicians who are very comfortable thinking that we're all happily fixing broken brains. And so the more people we can have telling the same stories in different ways that they've played out for families, the better. Yeah.
Thanks, Kerry. You're extraordinary. And pass on our thanks to John and the kids. So thank you again. You're amazing. Kendall, sorry.
I have a question from Howard. Howard's asking if it's possible to get a one-pager of the figures that you used, Sebastian. Just wanted to check that that's all good. If we could perhaps get a one-pager.
Not that you wanted to put me on the spot or anything. I'm sure I can do something.
Great. Thank you. There we go, Howard. Also, a note, a lot of people have questioned whether these slides will be available and some of the reports. Chelsea has said she will make them available. So for all of our participants, if you're not registered and you've just joined through the Zoom link, do make sure that you email Sarah because that way you'll continue to get the correspondence and you'll get the slides and everything too. So just a quick note there.
I'll upload this to the website as well in the resources section. Sorry.
Sorry guys, I'm just going through to make sure I don't miss anything. Trish has asked a question about the statistics that were used in Chelsea's presentation about if these were cross-referenced with stats about services like affordable housing. They weren't in the context of the presentation, but Chelsea has said that she will be able to do some of that. Is that right, Chelsea?
Yeah, the stats that come from the plan and the update to the plan from a year or two ago aren't linked to the social housing stats. The Mental Health Commission has done a draft accommodation and support strategy, which is called A Safe Place. That's one of the things that we are waiting with bated breath for government to release. It's been a long time coming and we really need that strategy. And that the draft has quite a lot more detail in it about the numbers of people that may be experiencing homelessness related to a mental health issue, that need a supported accommodation service and don't have one, and those kinds of things. So I will see what I can pull out from that. It is a bit limited because we can't distribute that because we don't have the final copy. Someone might like to write to the Minister and ask him when he's going to release a safe place. That would be a really helpful thing for people to do. At the moment, we were hoping that before the coronavirus happened, we were hoping that there would be some investment in mental health related supported accommodation programs in the budget that was due to come out in May. Now, because the budget has been delayed till October and we have a coronavirus economic scenario, we are working really hard to make sure that mental health gets more attention and investment in the budget that's now coming out in October, and we're really hopeful that that will include some focus on supported accommodation services. And we know that Shelter WA, who are good friends and colleagues of ours, are working really hard on calling for social housing as well, both pre and during a COVID-19 environment. So I think we're all doing as much work as we can to try and call for investment in social housing and saying, well, this would be a really good thing to invest in a coronavirus recovery, economic recovery. We can create jobs by building more social housing, and we can support people who are doing it tough at the same time.
Cool, thanks Chelsea. And I have one question from Carly as well. Carly has asked if community treatment services, as opposed to community support, have a stronger voice in terms of funding, and if so, how could we address that?
Carly, can you explain to me what you mean by voice in terms of funding for community treatment?
Maybe influence would be a different word, or an alternative word to use. I know that often in the consumer movement, often the opinions of health professionals and clinicians are sometimes more than people with lived experience. And I'm just wondering when the WA Department of Health are seeking funding for treatment, they get more airtime because they come from that clinical background.
Kerry, you might like to respond to this, but I think it's fair to say that the medical model and the views of clinicians still have a very strong voice in mental health advocacy and in funding decisions, and that you know, the access of the medical lobby is definitely strong. And we do think that there's an assumption towards a clinical response that is based on, you know, a historical approach of medicalising mental illness and saying that this is a disease and a sickness. And so what we're trying to do with this campaign is basically create a stronger voice for people who, people with lived experience, and provide a platform for you, Carly, and others who want to do that, so that we can highlight your voices. And that's the whole aim of the campaign. Kerry, did you want to add anything to that? You always speak so eloquently about these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about knowledge in this chain that we have. So our current services and the very poor outcomes and the very poor prevalence and the very poor mortality rate that we have flowing from these services are derived from policy, which is derived from knowledge, which is derived from clinicians. And it's very, very last century understandings. All of the recent literature, as we know, is that this has to be a situation for people that is viewed within the social context of their world, and that the brain is far, far more complex and responsive than we ever gave it credit for. And so I think whilst we know that that era of brain imaging and genetic discoveries and chemical imbalances is over, in terms of our policies and our service design, authority, it still sits very, very strongly with clinicians, and the appeal to clinicians as medical specialists, as we've seen with the COVID thing at the moment, is something that is very, very difficult to break, because everybody understands them to be the traditional authorized holders of knowledge, and so anything that challenges that is difficult. And the other challenge we have, of course, is because it has such a strong grip on government, it becomes very, very difficult for other voices to get in and to challenge these strong voices, because they are not resourced, because they have not seen. It's almost like a catch-22 situation. And so we're thinking that probably one of the only ways that we can break through this grip on knowledge and grip on power is just to break through with people's voices, and hope that people collectively can say the same thing, because we know that that's what people with lived experience are collectively saying, and that direct from the community to government, we can start to break through this power that clinical voices, despite all of the evidence demonstrating that these are not positions that are supported by outcomes or supported by you know, over time, any great advances in people's lives. In fact, as we say, it's going backwards. I think that using people power is probably one of the few options we have to kind of challenge that voice. So Carly, I agree with you. It's absolutely the case that the only people that are considered the safe holders of real knowledge are clinicians at this point in time.
So Sebastian, can I just add to that, Kerry? It's worth noting that the welcome addition of mental health expertise to the Corona National Task Force resides with a psychiatrist who has been operating in Victoria for 30 years. I mean, I know that person okay, and she's not a bad person, but I'm not sure she's going to be delivering the perspective that Kerry's talking about. And then I guess I just wanted to mention one other thing, and I'm not a clinician, but I guess, you know, just to be completely frank, you know, I have not been hurt or damaged by clinical care. I know many people have. So I'm prepared on the basis of that level of naivety to suggest that clinical care for some people is probably a good idea and remains a good idea. But there's two things about this. Clinical care has become completely predominant over psychosocial care. And so what psychosocial care means and what its role should be has never been properly understood. And so clinical care reigns. But then as a second element to this, and this is what I really don't understand, but I think it's something we need to be very conscious of in this campaign and going forward, is the immediate association between clinical care and hospital care. So hospitals, I think, I know are expensive, and I think are generally characterised as places of trauma and of acute care, and should be avoided. And I think the thing for me, which I really don't understand, but I can tell you this is a live debate now amongst clinicians, is why clinicians continue to support hospitals as the front door of our mental health system. And I find that egregious and wrong. That's all. I'll get off my soapbox.
Can I just
Seb, I think we're in complete agreement. And I found it interesting that the Victorian Royal Commission decided to appoint a clinician, a psychiatrist to head up their consultation process, and then another psychiatrist to head up the Centre for Reform. It's just sending messages all the time around authorisation of who holds the power and who holds the knowledge.
Could I add something? I think there's another front door, which is GPs, and that front door very often results in a prescription for a medication or a referral to a psychology service. And one of the questions that's come up on the chat from Kim is, what is this a question around evidence? Is there evidence around the community support services working as compared to the psychology services? And Seb, you will know more about this than me, but my understanding is that there is quite limited evidence for the many millions of dollars a year that we spend on the Medicare psychology-based services.
Okay, look, I'll be very quick. I won't take lots of time. What I would say is that there's extremely good evidence to indicate the merit of things like cognitive behavioural therapy, provided in sort of frequent but short doses for people with mild or common disorders, as they say. And again, I'm not speaking as a clinician, I'm just going on the evidence I've read. And here we start looking at things like the IAPT system, as was introduced in the United Kingdom, which I should also say has got a level of peer support for low intensity, which is very interesting, and is occurring in some places in Australia, although not supported very well. The issue here in Australia is that you've got a colossal expenditure. I think it's something like, I can't remember exactly, but last time I looked, I think it was sort of $17 million a week on the Better Access program. And the issue is that we don't know who's providing care, what they're providing, and whether it's actually cognitive behavioural therapy or something else, who's receiving the care, and what impact that care has. And for some reason, when I say that, my psychology friends get very cranky with me. But it seems to me, even as a taxpayer, that it would be really good for us to know the impact of this care. So look, there is good evidence to show that we should be doing this. We have very poor accountability, and what we also have in Australia is a situation whereby the rate of new clients into Better Access has been declining very steadily since it started, so that it may surprise people to know that each year only about 30% of clients using Better Access are new clients. 70% now are repeat clients. So whatever it is that they went to a psychologist for, they did not get their problem fixed in the sessions that they received. Psychologists will say, oh, well, they needed more sessions. The answer, of course, is more of me. But in fact, it could well be that they had the kinds of issues which you put up in your slides, Chelsea. They had associated other conditions, drug and alcohol. They were a young person who also needed assistance with sexual health or other things. Who knows? They may have had problems that were too complex just for a singleton clinician to manage, regardless of the number of sessions. So those kinds of questions and that kind of accountability needs to be explored. And then just to finish, because the question was really to compare Medicare and Better Access with other kinds of community supports. The amount of money which comes to the NGO sector and the psychosocial sector has always been minimal, and it's gotten worse since much of that funding has been redirected to the NDIS. Incidentally, I think there's a very strong chance that some of that NDIS money that has been pumped in from states and territories actually came from the NGO sector and is now ironically being provided by psychologists under the guise of something called functional improvement. But leaving that aside, what often happens with community services, and you would know this better than me, is they do get evaluated. Where they do get evaluated, it is fairly rare, but when they do get evaluated, they're generally found to be effective. Effective in providing support that people need, psychosocial support, forestalling readmission, reducing suicidality, and a range of these kinds of outcomes associated with evaluation for these community support services. And there have been Cochrane assessments of these things and other kinds of literature reviews which have brought some of this material together. Probably not enough, and it probably should be more better broadcast. But then, of course, what happens is that funding for these services, I don't know, you might call them partners in recovery, for example, you might call them personal helpers and mentors, whatever you want to call them, where an evaluation has been found to be effective, those programs are then defunded. So there's another classic issue in Australia is not only the identification of evidence-based care, but then also the scaling up and scaling out of services which have demonstrated to be effective. That is not a criteria that we apply to Medicare-based services. I hope that goes somewhere to answering the question.
Okay, so I didn't really put a time limit to the end of this, but I noticed people are jumping off. And so I just wanted to find out if anyone who hasn't spoke has a burning question and would like to just ask that now. Howard, yep.
I just want to make a comment. We said very much all about reducing stigma, but reflecting on what Kerry said today, is talking about a husband, a man who's got umpteen degrees, obviously contribution to today's society. What I'm getting at is that sometimes we can have the emphasis on the people that are a drain on society, and they're not. And if we look at history from a campaign overseas, where some of the world's most significant inventions are being done by people with a so-called mental illness, and I hate the term, by the way, but if I think you get what I'm saying at, but the people that are coming to this catchment area, and many of us do make significant contributions, but that gets negated by whatever other issues that society might not know how to deal with. So I'm just wondering whether somewhere along the line we could sort of, this campaign could sort of bring that out to the fore a little bit.
So,
and that's it, if you can hear me.
Yeah, you did cut out a little bit, and I wonder if it's because it's 6 o'clock and the system's getting a bit overloaded now with everyone coming home and jumping on the internet. So we might just wrap it up after this answer. Who would like to answer Howard if they understood his question?
Yeah, it was dropping out a fair bit, Howard, but I think your question was around stigma and a deficit-based approach to the way we treat people who experience distress and show that distress in certain ways that we can't make sense of. And that it's our role as the community sector to connect them back into the community, to educate the community. I think a lot of the previous work around stigma and mental health literacy has actually taken us backwards as well, and it has a lot to account for. So I do see that very much as part of this campaign to humanise people again, because the pathologising approach we know dehumanises people. And to connect people back into the community, that's the best way to get rid of stigma, because they start to hang out with other people who see that they are real people. So I do see that as part of the scope going forward, if I've understood your question, because it did cut in and out a fair bit.
All right, thank you.
I do have a problem. I've had a problem with my own. Okay, leave it.
Yeah, you're like Matt's headroom. You just keep moving in and out.
Yeah.
Howard. Okay.
I'll read you later.
Yeah. All right. Catch you later, Howard. Anybody else, last burning question, please make sure that you jump onto the events page and sign up to any of the online events. This is a movement, and this will be built on people power, and it's nice that we can come together and talk about the problems, but we have to tell the politicians what the problems are and how we think we can solve it. And the way to do that is through the power of our stories. So I can't do this alone. Chelsea can't do it alone. Kendall, none of us at WAAMH can do this alone. This is up to you. This is up to you to build your team around you and develop a letterboxing team, develop a door knocking team, host a morning tea, get 20 of your friends around, take them through the PowerPoint, get them to sign up, get them to sign the petition. Whatever it is, this is up to you guys now. So we can tell you all the detail and we can provide only so much, but it really is up to you guys to make your voices heard. So thank you all so much. Any parting words, Chelsea?
Thank you for bearing with me. I found it really tricky just speaking to the screen and seeing the PowerPoint. I couldn't see anyone's faces as well. So I hope it was okay. I love this chat function because I think it really adds a lot to the discussion, and for people that don't get a chance to speak up, we'll record all of that so that we can make sure that we integrate all of those issues into the campaign. One of the questions about evidence, I just thought I might give a quick shout out, is that we are just about to start a small research project to find out more from people with lived experience about exactly what they want and need from community supports and what they will look and feel like. So we'll be in touch with you more about that later. We're really excited about that. Is another way to add lived experience perspectives into some of the detail around what those community supports should be. So we're excited about that. There's heaps of things coming up, and thanks for the chance to share my nerdy stats with you.
So thank you, Seb. Thank you so much for taking the time in these extraordinary circumstances, because everything changed in your life. So generosity of humans is just amazing to me, and I always get overwhelmed by people's generosity. So thank you so much. Any parting words from you?
Look, just to say, well, really just to say congratulations on what looks to be a really thorough and well thought through campaign, and I'm delighted to be part of it. I'm just about to tweet about it, and if I can help going forward, I'd be delighted to do so. All power to your arm.
Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone, and the recording will be uploaded to the website very soon.